I found out my best friend had been sleeping with my fiancée for 11 months. On the morning of our engagement party. Not before the wedding. Not after some long, slow drift where I should have seen it coming. The morning of the party when I walked into my own kitchen and found them standing 2 feet apart with that particular stillness. That tells you everything before a single word is spoken. Her name was my fiancé. His name was my best friend. I'm going to call them exactly that throughout this, because I stopped using their names the day I drove out of Kelowna, with everything I owned packed into a rented Kia. My father called me a coward for leaving. My mother said I was overreacting. My younger brother, the one person I thought would have my back, told me I needed to think about how hard this is for everyone involved. Not for me. For everyone. I remember standing in their driveway, my car already running, and thinking, I don't actually know these people. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the morning it happened. We'd been engaged. For 8 months. She and I met through work. I was a project coordinator at a mid-sized construction firm in Kelowna, British Columbia, and she was brought in as a contract administrator. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I was 31. I thought I had it figured out. My best friend and I had known each other since grade 7. We grew up, 3 streets apart, in the same neighborhood. In Penticton, played hockey together through high school, and stayed close even after I moved to Kelowna for work. He was the first person I called when I got the promotion that let me put a down payment on my condo. He was the best man at my older cousin's wedding, and I always assumed he'd be mine too. That morning, I'd driven over to her parents' place early. She was staying there the week before the party. Her mother had been unwell and she wanted to be close to home. I'd offered to bring coffee and help set up the backyard. Nobody was expecting me until 9, and I showed up at 7:45, because I'd been too wound up to sleep and figured I'd just get started. I had a key. She'd given it to me months before, so I could let myself in when I picked her up for things. I let myself in through the back gate, came through the sliding door into the kitchen, and there they were. He had his hand on her arm. She had her forehead almost touching his shoulder. When the door slid open, they both stepped back at the same time. That same half second of synchronization that people only have when they've practiced being apart. I didn't say anything for what felt like a long time.
He started talking first.
He said, "It's not." And I held up my hand. I actually held up my hand like a crossing guard. I don't know why. It just felt like if he finished that sentence I was going to do something I couldn't take back. She started crying. I looked at her and I asked her one question. I said, "How long?" "How long?" She looked at the floor. She said, "A while." I said, "How long is a while?" She said, "Since March." It was February. I did the math standing there in her mother's kitchen. 11 months. Nearly a year. He had been at our place for Christmas dinner 2 months earlier. He had sat across from me at that table and eaten the turkey I cooked, and I had no idea. I put the coffees down on the counter. I walked back out through the sliding door. I sat in my car in the driveway for probably 20 minutes before I drove home. I didn't cancel the party that day. I know that sounds strange, but I was on autopilot. I went back to my condo, I sat on the couch, and I stared at the wall. Around noon she called me 14 times. He called me 6 times. I didn't answer any of them. At 2 in the afternoon my mother called. She said she'd heard from my fiancé that something had happened and asked if I was okay. I told her what I'd seen. There was a silence, and then my mother said, "Sweetheart, people make mistakes." I said, 11 months isn't a mistake. She said, "You don't know the whole story." I hung up. My father called an hour later. He was gentler about it. At first, he said he was sorry, that he understood I was hurting, and then he said he thought I should at least hear them out before I made any decisions. He said, "These are people who love you. Both of them." I told him I didn't want to hear that right now. He said, "I know, but I'm your father and it's my job to tell you things you don't want to hear." I said, "Okay, I've heard it." And I ended the call. My younger brother texted me that evening. His message said, "Heard what happened. That's rough, man. Hope you can get to a place where you understand where they were both coming from." I stared at that text for a long time. Then I put my phone face down on the coffee table and didn't pick it up again until the next morning. The party didn't happen. My fiancé's mother sent out messages to everyone that it was postponed due to a family health matter, which was technically true, in the sense that something was deeply ill. The next week was one of the worst of my life. She came by the condo twice. The first time I didn't answer the door. The second time I opened it because I thought I needed to hear her out. I'd been told by multiple people that I owed her that. She came in and she sat down, and she explained it to me. She said it had started the previous spring, at a gathering at my family's place. She said she and my best friend had connected over something. She used that word, connected, like it was a yoga retreat, and that she had tried to end it multiple times but kept going back. She said she loved me, and that was real and separate from what was happening with him. She said she was confused and scared and she was sorry. I listened to all of it. When she finished, I asked her one more question. I said, "Were you planning to end it before the wedding?" She was quiet for a moment, Then she said she thought so. I said, "You thought so?" She said yes. I said okay. And then I asked her to leave. My best friend never came to see me in person. He sent me a long message over text. I read the first few lines and then I deleted it. I don't know what it said and I don't need to. Over the following 2 weeks, my family, my parents and my brother, ran a quiet, persistent campaign to get me to reconsider. Not to take her back necessarily, but to be open to conversation. To not throw away my friendship with my best friend. My mother told me she'd spoken with him and that he was devastated. My father said the two of them had been over for dinner, and that he seemed like he was in a genuinely bad place. My brother sent me a voice message saying he thought I was being performatively distant. I sat with all of this. I actually sat with it. I'm not the kind of person who blows things up and walks away without thinking. I spent almost 3 weeks going over every angle, asking myself whether I was being too rigid, whether there was a version of this I could eventually come back from. And then one evening I was sitting at my kitchen table going through my mail, and I found a card my mother had sent me. Inside in her handwritings it said, "We hope you find a way to move through this and come back to us. You have a family that loves you and so does she. Don't let pride cost you more than it already has." I read it twice, I put it down, and I thought, she means both of them. She's asking me to come back to all of them, including him. That was when I knew I wasn't going to do that. I put my condo on the market 3 weeks later. The market in Kelowna had been solid. I'd bought in 2019, so even after fees I walked away with a decent amount in equity. I had a good RRSP, no car payments, and about $14,000 in my TFSA. I wasn't starting from nothing. I'd applied for a position with a larger construction project management firm in Halifax about a month before all this happened. Half on a whim, more as a thought experiment than anything else. They'd emailed me back twice and I hadn't responded. The morning after I decided I was done, I emailed them back. I had an offer within 10 days. I told nobody in my family I was leaving until the week before I went. My father called me when he found out, and his tone had shifted. He wasn't gentle this time. He said, "You're running away." I said, "I'm starting over. There's a difference." He said, "You're abandoning your family over a mistake." I said it wasn't a mistake, it was a choice they made together for almost a year, and then a choice you and mom made when you decided to have them over for dinner. He didn't say anything after that for a while. Then he said he was disappointed in me. I said, "I know." I left on a Thursday in late April. I drove to Calgary, flew to Halifax from there. My new employer had arranged temporary housing for the first month, a furnished apartment in the south ends of the city, walking distance to the harbor. I remember landing at Stanfield International and stepping out into the cold off the Northumberland Strait and thinking, nobody here knows anything about me. It was the first time I'd felt something close to relief in 2 months. I'm going to fast forward through the next few years. Because the day-to-day is less important than where I ended up. Halifax suited me in ways I didn't expect. The city is smaller than people think, but it has a rhythm to it. Friendly in the way Atlantic Canada tends to be. Without being in your business. I found a gym. I found a good Irish pub in the North End where I became a regular, which is something I'd never been anywhere. I started hiking on weekends, Cape Breton, the Annapolis Valley, Kajimkujik in the fall. I stopped eating lunch at my desk. Work went well. My new firm worked primarily on infrastructure and institutional projects. Hospitals, schools, a couple of federal government contracts. I was good at the work, and after 18 months I was promoted to senior project manager. It was more money than I'd made in Kelowna. And the cost of living in Halifax was still lower, so for the first time in my adult life I felt genuinely comfortable. I met a woman at a fundraiser for the IWK Health Center about 2 years after I arrived. She worked in marine policy for the federal government. She was from Cape Breton, originally sharp and direct and funny, in a way that took me a few weeks to fully calibrate to. We dated slowly, which is to say carefully, which is to say I told her on our third date exactly what had happened in Kelowna, and she didn't flinch or overreact, or say people make mistakes. She said, "That sounds like it cost you a lot." I said it did. She nodded and changed the subject and I liked her enormously for both of those things. Back in BC I had essentially no contact with my family. My mother sent emails occasionally, which I read and sometimes responded to briefly. My father stopped reaching out after about a year. My brother texted on my birthday each year. A single message that just said "Happy birthday, man." And I always replied with thanks and that was the extent of it. My best friend, as far as I knew, was no longer part of the picture. I heard through someone who knew someone that he and my fiancée had not stayed together. I heard that, and felt nothing in particular. Not satisfaction, not sorrow, nothing. 4 years after I left Kelowna, my mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon in November. I hadn't spoken to her on the phone since sometime the previous winter. A brief call where she'd asked about my health. And I'd asked about hers, and we'd both been careful. This call was different. I could hear it in the first 3 seconds. She said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay on the line while I do." I said, "Okay." She has said that my father had been diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia earlier that year. She said it had been progressing faster than the doctors initially expected. She said that managing his care was becoming difficult, and that they were looking into the possibility of him transitioning to a memory care facility, which in BC could run anywhere from $4,000 to $7,000 a month, depending on the level of care. She said their savings were being depleted faster than anticipated. She said my brother had 2 young kids and a mortgage in Surrey, and couldn't contribute much. She said, "I'm not asking you to fix everything, I'm just asking if you're willing to talk." I was quiet for a long time. She didn't rush me. I said, "How long have you known about the diagnosis?" She said, "Since February." I said, "It's November." She said, "I know." I said, "You waited 9 months to call me." She said, "I didn't know how." I sat with that for a moment. I thought about what it meant that she'd known for 9 months and hadn't called. I thought about what it meant that she was calling now. I said, "I need some time." She said, "Of course." I said, "I'm not making any promises." She said, "I know." We got off the call. I sat at my kitchen table until it got dark outside. My partner came home and found me there, and didn't ask questions right away. Just made tea and sat across from me and waited. When I finally told her, she listened to everything. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" Not what I should do. Not what was fair or right or expected. What did I want to do? That's the question I'd been trying to answer for the past 11 months, of being back in contact with my family. In one form or another. I did call my mother back, 3 days later. I want to be clear about what I said and what I didn't say. I told her I was willing to help with my father's care financially, within reason and within what I could manage without compromising my own situation. I told her I would contribute to a care fund. Not an open-ended commitment, but a defined monthly amount that I could sustain. I said I would revisit it every 6 months. I told her I was not willing to come back to Kelowna on any kind of regular basis. I told her that if I visited, it would be on my terms and my timeline. And I told her clearly, because I needed it, said out loud and on record, that what happened 4 years ago still happened. That my father's choosing to have my former best friend over for dinner, while I was still bleeding from what he'd done, was still a thing that happened. That my mother's card telling me not to let pride cost me more than it already had, was still in a box somewhere because I'd never thrown it out. Not because I was sentimental about it, but because I didn't want to pretend it hadn't been sent. She was quiet through all of it. When I finished, she said, "You're right, I'm sorry." She said it plainly without adding anything after it. No but. No context. No extenuating circumstances. I said, "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness. I want to be clear about that too. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a moment where everything got tied up and resolved. It was just an accounting. A laying out of the record. The beginning of something that might, over a long time, become something I could live with. My father's care ended up being coordinated through a facility in West Kelowna. A good one, from what my mother described. Between my contribution and what the family scraped together, the monthly shortfall was manageable. I never spoke directly to my brother about the money. My mother handled all of it. As for my former best friend, I've heard nothing. I've made no effort to hear anything. I hope he's living his life somewhere and leaving mine alone. That's the most generous thing I can honestly say. And my former fiancée, I genuinely don't think about her anymore. Not in the way I expected I would. Not with anger or longing or any of the complicated things I thought I'd be carrying forever. She became a chapter that ended badly, and then a chapter that ended. What I didn't expect, in any of this, was that Halifax would become home so thoroughly, that going back to BC even for a visit would feel like walking into someone else's old life. My partner and I bought a house in the Hydrostone neighborhood last spring. An old semi-detached, with a small backyard, and a kitchen that needed work and floors. I refinished myself on 3 consecutive weekends. She says I'm a slow finisher. I say I'm thorough. I still hike on weekends when the weather allows. I still go to the pub in the North End, although now I go with her, and sometimes with friends we've made here together. I have a life that is genuinely mine. Built from the ground up after someone else dismantled the first one. I don't tell this story often. I told it tonight because sometimes you need to hear that it's possible to lose the thing you thought was the foundation, and find out the foundation was the wrong material anyway. The morning I walked into that kitchen, and found them standing there, I thought my life was ending. I was wrong. It was just beginning something I couldn't see yet. Turns out you can build a lot on nothing, if you're willing to start.